All right. Whoa, no, 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 that didn't work. Give me one more minute. All right, so a decent amount of Q&A today. I would love some volunteers, but I know how it is. It's early in the morning. No one wants to talk. You got your masks on. You think you're invisible. But I do need some interaction today. So it's kind of one of those deals. If nobody's raising their hand, if a variety of people aren't raising their hand, I am going to call on you. Again, a lot of the things that we're going to ask about, that's not right. A lot of the things I'm going to try to ask you about, it's based on the reading, but honestly, a decent amount of it is kind of just your opinion. Let's duplicate. You guys seeing it now? Yeah, there we go. All right. So again, it kind of depends on how big you write. If you've got plenty of room in your Persian chart, any notes that you take today, you can certainly do in there. If not, just kind of add on onto the next page. Again, we're calling this the pre-Columbian American civilizations. Does anybody know why we call it pre-Columbian? Pre-Columbian. It's a pre-Columbus, because once Columbus shows up, everything changes, for the most part, for the worse. Pre-Columbian American civilizations, 1200 to 1450. We're going to be talking about the Mississippian, the Maya today, and then probably the Aztec and the Inca tomorrow. This is the area of the world we're talking about, the Americas. Can anybody tell me what hemisphere this is in? And I only bring this up because sometimes this kind of terminology will be, what hemisphere are we in the Americas? What's that? Partially in the southern hemisphere, but let's not think so much north-south, the western hemisphere. And I bring that up, guys, because most of the stuff that we've talked about thus far is all in the eastern hemisphere, after Eurasia. Throughout most of history, you've got this whole kind of area, these three continents, and later on some of the others, out here in the islands, out in Australia and whatnot. You've got these places connected through trade and travel, and you've got these places in the West, to some extent, collected through trade and travel. But there's no real meeting in between. I mean, when Columbus and the Spanish explorers show up, they call this place the New World, and it's not without reason. New plants, new animals, new cultures, different levels of development. Literally, once we get to 1492, although some others had shown up prior to that, they just didn't make as big of an impact. Literally, this is a new world, and everything changes after that. It's really not until 1492 that you truly have this sort of integrated global exchange, this sort of world history that we discuss all the time. So within this presentation, today and tomorrow, we're going to be talking about some of our North American, more or less what would be in the United States day civilizations, specifically the Mississippians, although we will talk a little bit about the Chaco and a few other groups over here in the western part of what is now the United States. Down in Mesoamerica, which you hear that term thrown around a lot, all that is Mexico and Central America. We'll be talking first about the Maya, who you read a little bit about during the post-classical age. They're still around during this time period, although they're very much on the decline. We'll talk about them, and then we'll talk about the Aztec a little further to the north. And then in South America, we are going to talk about the Inca Empire. High up in the Andes Mountains, definitely had to adapt quite a bit to survive in that sort of territory. First group we're going to look at is the Chaco and also the Mesa Verde. And these guys, there weren't any notes that you had to take for your Persian chart, because when you read through this in your book, that was like a paragraph. Okay, it wasn't very much. The big thing to know about these guys out in the West, what sort of environment is this? What sort of climate region is it? Yeah, it's hot, it's dry. I mean, they're out in the deserts. They're out in places like Arizona and Nevada. The reason that they are important is because, man, they knew how to adapt to their environment. Obviously, they had to be experts in irrigation, bringing water from other areas to kind of live off of. But if you look at this area, there's not a whole lot of trees. The trees and the foliage that you do see, I mean, there's not a lot of wood to build off of. So how did these people build? What did they use? What were their homes made out of? Yeah, rock, clay. You look here, literally, these are homes carved into the side of the cliff face. You look over here, yeah, they're using bricks, they're using clay, they're using things, you know, to be able to adapt in that environment. Guys, without any modern technology, how easy do you think it would be to live out in the desert? Nearly impossible. Has anybody ever been to like Arizona or Nevada? Okay. I went to Las Vegas like a year ago, like right before, you know, all the COVID stuff hit. First time I'd ever been there. And it was cool, you know, I mean, it is what it is. It's what you think it is. But you look at the landscape around the city and it's all rock, it's all dry, you know, there's not a whole lot of plant life. And you look at that area and it's like, how could someone survive here, you know, if you were not in modern times? But these people did. And it's one of those things that makes the human species so remarkable. We can adapt and thrive in almost any environment. We use technology and innovation to do that. So for the Chaco and the Mesa Verde, if they ever come up, just think they're the ones that live out in the desert. They're the ones that were highly adaptable. So I've got a question here. And I've got a few of these questions embedded throughout the presentation. And they're just ones I want you to think about, okay? And I'm going to ask just some random people these types of questions because I think, you know, I don't want to put you on the spot, don't get me wrong, but I just want you to think about it. And this kind of reflects back on something that we talked about earlier on when we talked about some of these very early native civilizations in the Americas. Again, two different worlds, okay? The Eastern Hemisphere, the Western Hemisphere, different worlds, different plants, different animals, different levels of development. I mean, you're going to notice that the civilizations that we're going to be discussing over the next couple of days, they look markedly different than some of the civilizations in the East. So this one kind of reflects on why. Compared to most Afro-Eurasian civilizations, what disadvantages did indigenous American civilizations have in terms of development? What are some things that pretty much everybody had over here or doing over here that in the Western Hemisphere, the indigenous or Native Americans, they either didn't have access to or they just hadn't really developed and fully used yet? Who thinks, oh wait, I told you I was going to do this at random. Mr. Hernandez, give me one thing.
It was more dry in the winter.
Okay. In some areas, you'd be right. It's not exactly what I was thinking of, but you could say that. They did face a lot of harsh conditions. Okay. Especially the Chaco and the Mesa Verde. But I'm talking about these people as a whole. The indigenous Americans as a whole compared to the people of Afro-Eurasia. Think about some really basic things that they had over here that they didn't have over there. Strong. That's one thing.
Most of like the Eurasian area had like seas and everything for transportation. All over there, the Western Hemisphere, it's like it's mostly just land.
Okay. I mean, the continents themselves, and you're right, they are surrounded by ocean. But I mean, if you look at the areas along the coastline here, there's so many more waterways. It's going to make trade a little bit more effective, especially by sea, than it would be over here. Now, that's not exactly what I was thinking. You're not wrong. But there were three specific things we went over at the very beginning of the year. It kind of helped to explain why these guys look so different. And I'm glad that you mentioned the ocean because it has something to do first with transportation. What is something that the people in the Americas did not have access to? There's a couple somethings, but something that they did not have access to that pretty much, you know, in the old world, in Afro-Eurasia, just about everybody. Isaac?
Yes.
Isaac, what do you think?
I was thinking more of a commercial trade.
Okay.
And more.
To some extent they did, but it's much more limited. But let's think why. Why aren't they trading and traveling as much?
They don't got boats.
Say it again?
They don't got boats.
Not very good ones. But that's not even one. I'm thinking of stuff that's so basic you would be shocked if they didn't have it. Does anybody know this one? Kinsey. They don't have wheels. You might want to write that down. This comes up, and it helps to explain a lot about why the civilizations, the levels of development that you see in the West are quite a bit different than what you see in the East. They do not have wheels for transportation. Obviously, they knew what a circle was. Okay, you will see circular, round-style calendars a lot, especially in the Maya and the Aztec civilizations. But they don't have wheels that have been implemented for transportation. So just think about that. No wheeled wagons or carts or chariots or any of those things. Think about something even more basic than that. A way that most people, short of boats, short of like a wagon, would have traveled, I don't know, 1,000 years. What's one of the more fundamental basic things that you could use back in the day to get from point A to point B? Say it loud. Horses. Guys, in the Americas, they do not have horses. And to even expand on that, they don't have any real large beasts of burden. They don't have donkeys. They don't have elephants. They don't have horses. They don't have cows. They don't have, bulls. They don't have yaks. They don't have all these different things that people in the East have been using for years and years to not only get from point A to point B, but also to help them till their fields, to help them move products. There's one other thing, and this one I'm going to give you. And this is a little misleading because they had this stuff and they used this stuff. They just didn't really use it for tools and weapons at this point. Does anybody know one more thing they didn't have? What is it? That's the last one. They had metals. They had metals. They had gold and silver. They had metals, okay? And they even worked with metals, but it was mainly for jewelry and ornamentation. The people of the Americas in 1492, when Columbus comes over with the conquistadors and the rest is history, they're still essentially in the Stone Age. Whereas at this point, over in the old world, they're well into the Iron Age. They're even expanding on that. They've got steel. They've got guns. They've got cannons. Whereas they're fighting against people that are still using bow and arrow primarily. So you look at those three things: the lack of wheels, the lack of large domesticated animals, the fact that they are still essentially in the Stone Age. You can start to see some of the reasons that maybe on the surface they don't look quite as developed, and why it's one of the reasons why the Europeans, although small in numbers, were able to come over and conquer the indigenous Americans in fairly short order. So the first group we're going to talk about is the Mississippians. Why do you think they were called the Mississippians? Just somebody tell me. Yeah, they're around the Mississippi River. Their culture really surrounded it. Sometimes the Mississippians are also called the Hopewell culture. But it's really, rather than like one tribe, it's a collection of tribes within this whole region. One of the biggest things that the Mississippians are known for, aside from being near the river and really benefiting from that, was this huge trade city of Cahokia. You don't want to have that down. If you don't have that down somewhere with the Mississippians, and I would say it would probably fit best in either political or economics, you need to have that down. At its height, I want to say they had over 40,000 people that lived there, which is pretty astonishing back then. It's not like human population was huge. By 1250, the year 1250, right about the time period we start our curriculum, guys, they've got 40,000 people that live there. And this, unlike most other cities in the Americas, it's huge and it's a thriving trade city. Now, one of the things that we had previously talked about, you do have some trade cities in the Americas, don't get me wrong. We talked about, Teotihuacan. Later, we'll talk about Tenochtitlan. We're talking about Cahokia. But they're relatively rare because, again, large-scale trade is a little bit harder because, again, they don't have the wheels, they don't have the animals. Why then, just looking at the map, and I'll let you volunteer, why then is Cahokia such a thriving trade city? What might they use to facilitate said trade?
It's close to this river for trade.
Yeah. Again, they didn't have the best boats, but they did have boats. And the fact that they've got this natural resource, this transportation corridor, it's one of the reasons that made trade and travel a little bit easier in this region than a lot of other regions that you would have in the Western Hemisphere. One of the huge things that I would associate with the Mississippians, and they're largely probably religious in nature, earthen mounds. They were what we call mound builders. And I'd maybe put something like that in religion. You know, it could go a few different ways. But they're mound builders. And guys, these mounds are huge. I mean, just imagine what it would take without animals, without wheel technology, to stack up this much earth and rubble and be able to form these structures, while not quite as elaborate as a pyramid, but these things are huge, okay? We're talking the largest of these mounds is like 12, 13 football fields in length and in width. That is pretty astonishing. A lot of bodies have been found under these mounds. So likely, again, you know, there was some sort of religious connotation to it. But these were structures. These were well organized. You know, they had to have a well organized population to build these things. Does anybody see anything distinctive in this picture? Because this is like a mound, but on top you see a certain pattern. Does anybody see what it is? Yeah, the squiggly line. A lot of indigenous American cultures, you know, they're polytheistic. And a lot of their gods are kind of represented by different animals, things that they would see in nature. So what do you think this represents? A giant snake. This is the Great Serpent Mound, where you've got this snake. And just think about it. This is, I forget exactly how long this is, but this is an aerial photograph of the way up. You've got this snake, and it's still, you know, there to this day, eating an egg. And some say this kind of symbolizes the cycle of life and death. So again, we can only speculate on some of their beliefs, but the fact that they committed to you know, this monumental architecture, these projects, you know, it kind of speaks to how strong their beliefs were. That is a running theme you're going to see in these native civilizations. They are very devout in their beliefs. Much like a lot of the other civilizations, you know, their leaders oftentimes have kind of a dual political and religious role. And their beliefs certainly dictate some of their behaviors, which, you know, to some of us, you know, we'll look at this and say, well, maybe that's a little bizarre. First video of the day, we're going to watch a little thing on Cahokia, specifically in the mound builders. I will tell you, this one is old school. I don't know when this was produced, probably the early 90s, maybe even the late 80s. But of the ones I found, you know, for the fact that it's not very long, it's pretty good. It gives you a good understanding of who these people were and some of the things that they believed. Pay attention, we got some questions that follow. Okay. Again, it's old school. It's not bad.
Along the Mississippi River, 6 miles from present-day St. Louis, Missouri, there stood.
Remember, guys, the videos are on Canvas if you want to watch them.
At its center was a powerful leader.
A great number of years ago, there appeared among us a man who came down from the sun. This man told us that he had seen from on high that we did not govern ourselves well, that we had no master, that each of us had presumption enough to think himself capable of governing others, while he could not even conduct himself.
1,000 years ago, the great sun, a leader who was both king and pope, lived atop a man-made royal mountain, 10 stories high. Its 16-acre base larger than any pyramid in Egypt.
The wheels,
He
the
told
devil to
us.
help them out.
That in order to live in peace among ourselves, we must observe the following points. We must never kill anyone but in defense of our own lives. We must never know any woman besides our own. We must never take any things that belong to another. We must never lie, nor get drunk. We must not be avaricious. We must give generously and with joy, and share our subsistence with those who are in need of it.
From the heights of his royal estate, the great sun mediated between the Creator and the people, between the sun and the earth. This is Cahokia, city of the sun. The great sun ruled the thriving center of a vast Mississippian culture. Outside the walled city, communities of farmers, hunters, and fishermen stretched for miles, surrounded by fields of corn. With 20,000 residents, no city in the United States would surpass Cahokia's historic size before 1800. Only then would Philadelphia's population eclipse the ancient center.
These people lived in daub and wattle houses on top of the principal people did, the priests and the royalty. They lived in very substantial houses, not teepees. Not teepees. Teepees, Western Plains people. Down here they lived in houses. They were sedentary, they were farmers, they used the rivers and the bayous and the streams as not only for commerce, but for sustenance as well.
With the Mississippi and other major rivers as its highways, Cahokia was linked by trade to a third of the continent. Copper arrived from the Great Lakes, obsidian from Yellowstone, mica and crystal from the Appalachians, gold and silver from Canada, shell from the Gulf of Mexico.
Look at these old live oak trees that have seen so much pass by them. Magnificently dressed Indian people coming down that bayou in a dugout, greeting people, standing right here on this bank, of having a good time, because they did. You know, Indian people have always known how to have a good time. And there would be a feast prepared. The women would put the corn together, they'd play softki. They would roast a deer. The people would bring gifts. You never go to an Indian's house without bringing something that was as old as the sunrise.
Cahokia was the pinnacle of a mound-building culture with traditions dating back.
Really? Well, sure, it didn't stop right there, but whatever. I guess we've got enough. But again, pretty amazing when you look at what they were able to accomplish with, again, you know, those pretty distinct technological disadvantages. I mean, it's, I don't know, I think it's pretty cool. Where am I here? Oh. Now, some of this stuff I'm going to answer myself just because we are, you know, kind of short on time. But what I was going to ask is, based on the previous pictures and your assigned reading, what conclusions can you draw regarding Mississippi movies? Well, some pretty basic ones, okay? And this goes along with the video. First, polytheistic people. Most native indigenous American peoples were polytheistic. They're not always the exact same gods, but a lot of very similar deities. Animal-based deities, you know, especially when we get like down into Mesoamerica, a lot of jaguars and serpents and eagles and stuff. But you also always almost see the sun The sun, the god of the sun, the power of the sun being something that's really honored. Okay, another thing you're going to see that's pretty much a theme throughout most of these groups we're going to talk about, their leader, like most leaders we've talked about thus far, they were seen as in some way otherworldly. Okay, they weren't just a man or a woman in some cases. They were seen as either chosen by the gods or descended from the gods. Plus, as you saw in the pictures, they had some beliefs about the afterlife. We do know that under those mounds, there's burial sites, which again, much like the Egyptian pyramids, you know, when you're willing to put forth that much effort into honoring your dead, it speaks to just how important your religious beliefs are, but also how strong your beliefs in the afterlife. Moving a little further to the south to the area we call Mesoamerica, which is just Mexico and Central America. A lot of times, guys, on the AP test, they're just going to give you a geographic region. They may not give you a specific civilization. You have a succession of dominant civilizations, really going back to the foundational civilization of the Olmec, going all the way back to, man, you know, 1500 BC. It's a very, very long time ago, you know, 3,500 years ago. They laid the foundation. And yeah, we remember them for their giant stone heads and things like that. But you got to understand a lot of the calendar systems, a lot of the writing systems that later on will be made more famous by people like the Maya. They at least are partially influenced by the Olmec. The Olmec are really the prototype civilization that you have in Mesoamerica, because almost every civilization that came after them at least borrowed elements of their culture. So you've got the Olmec, you got some people we didn't really talk about too much, the Zapotec, the Mixtec. We briefly discussed Teotihuacan, this huge trade city in Mexico. The Toltec come, the Aztec come at the tail end, we will talk about them tomorrow. Then you have the Maya. And the Maya lasted a very long time. In fact, you've seen and talked about the Maya a little bit already, because they were around during that sort of classical era into this post-classical era. Again, they're definitely on the decline by the time we open up in the year 1200, but they are still around to some extent, and they're going to be really influential, especially on the Aztec, that aren't around all that long, but they do make a pretty big historical impact. Those are really the first groups that had to contend with the invading Spanish conquistadors coming over in the late 1400s. Take a quick look at the pictures here, because each one of them indicates some sort of specific characteristic of Mayan culture. Now, our final video, and again, we didn't get quite as far as I wanted, but that's okay. Our final video of the day, it's one I actually posted to Canvas a while back when we were doing the classical era, but I think, you know, it's worth watching again because it's only 3 minutes. 3 or 4 minutes, and it's a good reminder of exactly who these people were. And again, remember, they don't have wheels, they don't have metal weapons and tools. This is volcanic glass and wood. They don't have a lot of things that, you know, people over in the old world had at their disposal, had at their disposal for generations. Yet when you really look at what all they were able to accomplish, it's nothing short of astonishing. So let's watch our next little video over the Maya, and then I'll try to kind of wrap this up. We'll probably still have a little bit to do over the Maya tomorrow. All right, here we go.
The Maya. They're considered one of the most advanced civilizations to have existed in the Americas before the Spanish conquest. But who exactly were the ancient Maya people, and what led to the collapse of their civilization? As early as 1800 BC, the Maya had begun settling and established villages in what is today Mexico and Central America. Maya civilization peaked from 250 to 900 AD, during what archaeologists call the Classic period. More than 40 cities flourished throughout the region, with populations as large as 50,000. The Maya built magnificent urban centers consisting of stone structures, including pyramid temples that were central to Maya religious practices. In addition to these impressive city structures, agriculture played a key role in Maya civilization. Corn was one of the predominant crops. The Maya creation story tells of nature gods, the basis of Maya religion, who created humans out of yellow and white corn. The Maya also made significant advancements in mathematics and astronomy. They invented the concept of zero, and they developed an accurate calendar system. Used to guide the Maya agricultural cycles, the calendar was based on observations of the sun and sky over thousands of years. The Maya also developed the only known system of writing in Mesoamerica, hieroglyphs. In fact, much of what we know about ancient Maya civilization comes from deciphering hieroglyphic characters inscribed in pottery, stone slabs, and other ruins discovered at ancient sites. Hieroglyphs have revealed that, despite the Maya's ingenuity and agrarian lifestyle, conflict was prevalent among some Maya city-states as they battled for control of the region. Throughout much of the Classic period, the city-state of Tikal, located in modern-day Guatemala, reigned as the closest thing to an empire in Maya history. But for a period of roughly 130 years, the Tikal people were overtaken through force and diplomacy by the Kanul, a rival kingdom. Toward the end of the Classic period, around 900 AD, most Maya cities had collapsed. Among the theories are warfare, a volcanic eruption, and, perhaps most likely, drought. However, archaeologists still debate why, as new evidence continues to emerge. Despite the decline of ancient Maya civilization, the Maya people have by no means disappeared. More than 7 million Maya are estimated to be alive today in their indigenous homelands and around the world. While they participate in modern global life, they continue to follow agricultural and ceremonial practices of their ancestors.
That's kind of a misconception. When I was a kid and we learned about the Maya, our teachers would say, oh, they just up and disappeared. No one knows what happened to them. It's not exactly true. They did start abandoning these big city-states, and moving more to a rural lifestyle out in the jungle. They didn't actually disappear. They just dispersed from all that hard work. Now, that is kind of mysterious. If you will, go ahead and clear your desk. We are done for the day. Tomorrow we're going to do just a little bit more on the Maya because they do influence people to come after them. Then we'll probably spend most of the day on the Aztecs. Should get to the Inca tomorrow. If we don't finish the Inca, it's okay because on Thursday, really, we need to wrap this up, talk about how to do an SAQ again. And then, like I said, in all likelihood, you're not going to actually do the SAQ in class. It'll be homework, but again, it's short. It will take you, I'll probably only give you 15 minutes, so it's really not that bad. That is kind of where we're going to pick up tomorrow. So just kind of be prepared for that. And yeah, if you haven't finished your Persian chart, if you haven't finished your reading, I would highly suggest that because we're going to go over a lot, but there's some stuff that's only in your reading that could potentially help you on the SAQ.